The piano in Dustwater's saloon fell silent the moment she walked in, as if even the music didn't dare follow her shadow. A sharp note hung in the air, clashing with the scrape of boots and the clink of whiskey glasses before fading into a silence so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Eliza Mae felt the weight of every eye fastened to her like thorns pressed into her skin. She had expected the whispers, they always came, but this silence was worse. It was the silence of men and women staring, measuring, and judging. Her hand twitched at her side, fingers curling into the worn fabric of her skirt. She knew what they saw, a face marred by a jagged scar that stretched from her jaw to her ear, teeth that leaned unevenly like weathered fence posts, and a pair of wide, watchful eyes that seemed too big for her face. Folks had called her ugly. All her life, some with pity, most with laughter. But this time, there was no pity. There was only disbelief, because beside her stood Kiyan. He filled the doorway in silence, broad shoulders squared, black hair falling down his back like a raven's wing. The firelight glinted off the beads and silver woven into his hair, off the leather band across his chest, off the knife strapped at his hip. He was Apache. No one in Dustwater forgot that. His name carried across the frontier like a rumor whispered. At campfires, a warrior who had fought off raiding parties twice his number, a man who had ridden through a storm with arrows bristling from his horse and survived, and now he walked into Dustwater with Eliza Mae at his side, a chair scraped across the floor. "You've got to be yoking," someone muttered from the back. A snort followed. "That's his wife?" The saloon erupted with the low, buzzing sound of whispers rising and colliding like a hive disturbed. Men leaned toward each other, women covered their mouths, and a poker player barked out a laugh that rattled his cards. Kiyan did not look at them. His dark eyes scanned the room, once calm, steady, unhurried, before resting on the empty table. In the corner, he placed his hand lightly on Eliza Mae's back, guiding her forward. Her legs felt wooden. The sound of her boots on the saloon floor echoed far too loud in her ears. She could feel their stares following the scar on her cheek, measuring the slump of her shoulders, mocking the very air she breathed. They sat, the saloon keeper, a red-faced man with a belly that strained against his vest, waddled over with 2 mugs of beer. He set them down, but his gaze kept drifting toward her scar. "Eliza Mae," he said with an awkward smile. "Been a while since we seen you in town. Thought you went east." "Didn't," she murmured, voice dry. The man shifted his eyes to Kiyan. His smile faltered, replaced with the cautious respect men gave rattlesnakes. "And you, sir?" "Never thought I'd see the day an Apache warrior came strolling into Dustwater, much less with—" He glanced back at Eliza, then cleared his throat. "With company." Kiyan didn't flinch. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that cut through noise without raising itself. "She is my wife." The words landed like a bullet. The room went still, then cracked open with laughter. A cowboy near the door slapped his knee. Another choked on his drink. Even the piano man gave a sharp bark before clapping a hand over his mouth. Ugly Eliza Mae, a warrior's bride? Someone held. Eliza Mae felt her cheeks flame, but Kiyan remained still. He didn't argue, didn't bristle, didn't strike out. He simply reached across the table, picked up his beer, and drank, as if the world around them didn't exist. His calm was so steady it frightened her more than their laughter. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wanted to run, to fling open the doors and disappear into the dark prairie night. But she couldn't, not with Kiyan sitting there as though this moment were nothing but dust on the wind. And so she stayed. The laughter went on, cruel and relentless. But slowly, some of the voices faltered. Men who had mocked began to glance uneasily at Kiyan's broad shoulders, at the blade strapped across his thigh, at the sheer stillness in his face. A warrior like him didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten. His silence was its own kind of warning. When the room finally quieted again, the whispers started up. Quieter this time, more careful. Why her? What's he want with Eliza Mae? Mark my words, it ain't natural. Apache don't do nothin' without reason. Eliza stared into her beer, the amber liquid trembling in her hands. Her stomach twisted with shame, but beneath it, something else stirred, something she had never felt before. It wasn't safety, not yet. It wasn't pride. It was the tiniest spark of defiance, because Kiyan had not looked at her with pity, not once. His eyes had not strayed to her scar or her teeth or her two wide eyes. He looked at her as if she were simply herself, and that was enough. That night in Dustwater's saloon, with laughter still echoing in her ears, Eliza Mae realized something. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to disappear anymore. Maybe the warrior at her side saw something the others couldn't, and that thought terrified her more than anything. Dustwater was a place that thrived on judgment. Nothing stayed secret for long, and stories true or not spread faster than prairie fire. By the time Eliza Mae and Kiyan left the saloon that night, every porch light flickered with curious eyes, every doorway filled with whispering mouths. Children peeked around barrels and fence posts, staring at the strange pair. They saw the tall Apache warrior bear chest gleaming under the moonlight, black hair rippling down his back, tribal jewelry catching the lamplight like fire. They whispered his name, Kiyan, with both awe and fear. To them, he was a figure of legend, the kind of man their fathers spoke of when warning them not to wander too far into the canyons. And then there was Eliza Mae, the girl who had been branded ugly before she was even grown. Children remembered her too, not with awe but with cruel little rhymes. They had thrown stones once, years back, until her father came out with a shotgun. Now those same children gawked openly, their mothers tugging them back inside, muttering about curses, about unnatural unions. The preacher's wife clucked her tongue as the couple passed. "Lord have mercy," she said, loud enough for Eliza Mae to hear. No man of God would bless such a union. There's trickery in it, sure, as the devil himself. At the blacksmith's forge, sparks flew as hammer met anvil, though the man's eyes weren't on his work. He leaned close to a neighbor, voice low but sharp. "Mark me, it ain't love. Apache don't marry for love. He's using her. For land, for coin, for something. You'll see." Every word pricked at Eliza Mae's skin. She walked stiffly beside Kiyan, trying to make her shoulders broad, her step steady. But inside, her stomach churned. The shame, the mockery, it was nothing new. Yet somehow, tonight, it cut deeper. Maybe because she had dared to hope the warrior's presence might shield her. Maybe because, for the first time, she wanted to be seen differently. Kiyan walked like a man deaf to gossip. His eyes didn't waver, his steps didn't falter. He carried himself the way a mountain carries the wind, unshaken, unmoved. And when his hand brushed against hers, warm, rough, steady, it was as though the jeers and whispers fell away. For a heartbeat, she felt only that touch, anchoring her to something stronger than the town's scorn. They passed the churchyard. A group of men leaned against the fence, cigars glowing in the dark. One spat into the dirt and barked a laugh. "Ugly Eliza's got herself a savage," he drawled. "Guess even Injuns go blind when they drink enough cactus liquor." The others chuckled, but when Kiyan's gaze cut toward them, the laughter dried up. His eyes, dark as canyon stone, carried a weight that made even the boldest man shift his boots and look away. Kiyan said nothing, didn't need to. His silence was a blade, sharper than steel. Eliza Mae let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For a moment, pride swelled in her chest. Not because he had defended her with words, but because he hadn't needed to. His presence alone silenced men who had mocked her all her life, but as they reached the edge of town, Eliza Mae glanced back. Behind them, the saloon windows glowed and the streets buzzed with murmurs. Dustwater was a town that did not forget. And already she knew this night would follow them like a ghost. She spoke at last, her voice low. "They'll never let me be, Kiyan. Not here. Not with you." He stopped walking, turning toward her under the moonlight. His hair caught the wind, his chest rising slow and even. "Let them talk," he said simply. "The wind speaks louder." She frowned, not understanding. "The wind?" Kiyan nodded. "Words are like wind across the desert. They pass. They leave nothing. But the earth," he tapped his palm against the soil with quiet reverence, "the earth remembers only the steps of those who walk with purpose." Eliza Mae's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as if her life could carry weight, as if her steps might matter. But when they reached the broken-down ranch Kiyan had chosen for their home, a sagging fence, a barn with holes in its roof, weeds climbing the porch boards, her hope faltered again. Dustwater would not forget. The land itself looked like it had given up, and she wondered, as the night wrapped around them, whether she had the strength to walk this path with him. The moon rode high above the prairie when Kiyan finally led Eliza Mae beyond the edge of Dustwater. The town's glow faded behind them, swallowed by the vast dark of the land. Ahead stretched miles of dry grass that shivered under the night. Wind, dotted here and there with the bent shapes of mesquite and sagebrush. Coyotes howled in the distance, their calls carried thin and sharp across the plain. Eliza Mae's hands tightened on the reins. She had traveled this way once before as a child when her father had taken her out hunting quail. Even then, the land had felt empty. But now, with the town's safety shrinking behind her and nothing but shadows ahead, it felt abandoned. And then she saw it. The ranch. At first glance, it looked more like the bones of something long dead. The fence that circled the land sagged in places, posts leaning as though exhausted by years of wind. The barn hunched in the moonlight, roof caved in, its skeleton showing through the gaps. The house was no better, shutters dangling by a single hinge, porch boards warped and gray, the windows dark and hollow. Eliza Mae swallowed hard. This is where we'll live?" Kiyan dismounted, moving with the unhurried grace of a man who feared nothing in the dark. He rested his hand against one of the leaning fence posts, fingers brushing over the wood as if he were greeting an old friend. "Yes," he said simply. She slid from her horse, her boots sinking into the dry earth. "But it's ruined," she said, her voice betraying the weariness she'd been holding back all night. "There's nothing left. Even the land looks tired." Kiyan crouched, scooping a handful of soil into his palm. He let it sift slowly between his fingers, the grains catching the moonlight before falling back to the earth. "The land is never ruined," he said. "It remembers. It waits." Eliza Mae crossed her arms, hugging herself against the chill. "All I see is broken boards and weeds. Dustwater already thinks we're fools, Kiyan. If they see me living here, they'll laugh harder." At that, he turned to her. His long black hair lifted in the wind, his eyes steady, dark as the earth itself. "Do you care what they see?" Her mouth opened, but no answer came. Of course she cared. She had spent her whole life beneath there, eyes drowning in their cruel words, praying for one kind glance. To say otherwise would be a lie. Kiyan stepped closer, so close she could smell the faint scent of smoke and leather that clung to him. "They see with eyes that do not know you. I see with the earth. I see a woman who has walked through fire and still stands. That is why I chose this place. Like you, it looks broken. But like you, it carries strength still." The words pierced her deeper than any insult the town had ever thrown. She looked away, afraid that if she met his gaze too long, He would see the storm of emotions twisting inside her: fear, longing, disbelief, and something she dared not name. Instead, she busied herself with the small tasks of survival. Together, they tied the horses in what remained of the barn, the animals stamping nervously on the uneven boards. Kiyan pulled out a bundle of wood and flint from his saddlebag, sparking a fire on the dirt floor of the house's main room. Soon, flames licked upward, filling the hollow space with warmth and light. Eliza Mae sank onto the floor, her back against the wall. The firelight painted the scar on her cheek in shades of gold and shadow, softening its harshness. She watched as Kiyan moved about the room with calm purpose, laying down blankets, checking the walls for drafts, as if he had already claimed the place as theirs. Her eyes burned with tiredness, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she whispered, "You really think we can make this place a home?" Kiyan sat across from her, the firelight glinting off the silver pendant at his chest. "The earth does not ask if you can," he said. "It asks if you will." Eliza Mae drew her knees to her chest, the warmth of the flames brushing against her face. She had no answer. But for the first time that night, as the wind rattled the broken shutters and the coyotes cried again in the distance, she felt the smallest flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Not safety, not peace. Hope. The fire crackled low in the ruined hearth, its glow spilling across the room like warm honey. Shadows danced on the cracked walls, filling the hollow house with life it hadn't known in years. Outside, the wind rattled through the broken shutters. But inside, the air carried the scent of smoke, leather, and earth. Eliza Mae sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, her dress tucked under her knees. The heat of the flames warmed her cheeks, softening the scar that usually drew stares. For once, she wasn't thinking about the town's whispers or the cruel laughter that followed them down every street. Instead, she watched the way firelight flickered against Kiyan's skin. He sat across from her, silent, his powerful chest bare beneath the strands of tribal jewelry that glinted whenever the fire popped. His long black hair fell forward as he bent to carve a piece of wood, the blade flashing in his hand. There was no hurry in his movements, just the steady, patient rhythm of a man who lived outside the rush of other people's clocks. Eliza Mae swallowed. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't the kind that suffocated. It was different, like the hush that hangs over a meadow before sunrise. Still, she couldn't let it stretch too long. You don't care what they said tonight?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kiyan didn't look up. His knife continued its slow dance along the wood. "The town?" "Yes," she said, her throat tight. "They laughed. They always laugh. But this time it was worse. I could feel it, Kiyan. Every one of them waiting for me to break, to run out the door in shame, and maybe I wanted to." She stared into the fire, her voice trembling. "I don't understand why you chose me. Not when you could have had someone else. Anyone else." At that, the knife still Kiyan lifted his head, and the firelight caught his eyes, dark, steady, unreadable, but burning with a quiet certainty. He set the carving aside and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "They do not see what I see," he said simply. Eliza Mae's heart stuttered. "And what do you see?" Kiyan's gaze didn't waver. His voice was low, steady, like the earth itself speaking. "I see strength. I see a woman who has walked through fire and still carries the scent of smoke. I see someone the wind cannot bend, though it tries." Her breath caught. No one, not her father, not her neighbors, not a soul in Dustwater had ever said words like that to her. She had been called scarred, crooked, ugly, cursed, but never strong, never unbendable. She tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "You're talking like I'm something more than I am." Kiyan tilted his head slightly. "Do you not know yourself?" The question stilled her completely. She searched for an answer but found none. All her life, her reflection had been a reminder of what others saw, and what others saw was not enough. Her eyes burned. She turned away, embarrassed by the sudden sting of tears. "You make it sound so easy," she whispered. "Like I could. Just forget everything they've said about me." Kiyan shifted closer, and she felt the heat of him mingle with the fire's warmth. "You do not need to forget," he said softly. "You only need to remember what they cannot take. They cannot take your steps. They cannot take your fire." For a moment, she didn't move. The scar on her cheek tingled as if the words had sunk beneath her skin, deeper than bone. She finally dared to look at him. In the fire's glow, his face was carved from shadow and flame, his features softened by the light. For the first time, she didn't see the feared Apache warrior that the town spoke of in whispers. She saw a man who had chosen her, not in spite of her scars, but perhaps because of them. Her throat tightened. "You're not afraid of me?" Kiyan's lips curved, just slightly, the ghost of a smile. "Afraid? You are the fire that does not go out." The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It wrapped around them, warm and alive, as though the broken house itself had leaned closer to listen. Eliza Mae let out a long, shaky breath. For the first time in years, the sound of her own heartbeat didn't make her want to hide. It made her want to believe. And there, in the glow of fire and shadow, she wondered if perhaps this place, the broken ranch, the scarred woman, the warrior who spoke of strength, could truly be the start of something new. The dawn broke harsh and red, spilling across the prairie like blood on a canvas. Eliza Mae woke to the distant sound of horses pounding the earth, their hooves drumming in ragged bursts. She sat up quickly on the dirt floor of the ranch house. The fire reduced to ash beside her. Kiyan was already at the doorway, long hair lifting in the morning wind, his bare chest streaked with smoke and shadow. He didn't move, didn't speak. He only listened. "What is it?" Eliza Mae asked, her voice hoarse with sleep. He raised a hand, silencing her. The hoofbeats faded, then the faint crack of a rifle carried across the plains. A hawk wheeled. Overhead, screeching as if it too had seen the danger, Kiyan turned, his eyes sharp. "Riders, not hunters. They take cattle." Eliza Mae's stomach nodded. She had heard the stories raiding bands that swept through small towns, leaving smoke and blood behind. Dustwater was weak, and its people weaker still. They had always hidden when trouble came, always waited for others to fight their battles. She rose to her feet, brushing the dirt from her dress. "The town?" "They are not ready," Kiyan said, his voice flat. "They hide, and the thieves grow bold." He stepped outside, the morning sun spilling over his skin, turning the silver of his tribal pendants into fire. Eliza Mae followed, her pulse thudding hard in her throat. In the distance she saw the black smear of smoke rising. From the north, the faint shapes of riders moving fast across the land. Kiyan went to his horse, tightening the reins with practiced ease. His movements were calm, deliberate, as though danger were an old companion. "You're going after them?" she asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "Yes." The word was simple, final. He swung into the saddle with the fluid strength of a man born for battle. Eliza Mae stood frozen. The scar on her cheek burned hot under the sun. All her life she had watched men fight while she shrank back, swallowed by shame and silence. But something inside her shifted now. Maybe it was the memory of the firelight and the way Kiyan had spoken of her strength. Maybe it was the look in his eyes when he called her the fire that would not go out. Before she could stop herself, she grabbed the rifle leaning against the wall, the old Winchester her father had left behind before death claimed him. The wood was worn smooth, the barrel dull, but the weight of it felt right in her hands. Kiyan's gaze flicked to her as she stepped forward, rifle clutched tight. "You cannot stay here," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Not alone, and neither can I." For a heartbeat, he studied her. Then, to her surprise, he nodded once. They rode together, the prairie wind snapping at their clothes, the horses' hooves tearing up the dry earth. The closer they drew to the smoke, the sharper the smell became burnt wood, scorched hides, the bitter tang of fear. When they crested a ridge, the scene unfolded below them. A ranch had been struck, its corral broken open, cattle driven off. By half a dozen riders who laughed and shouted as they rounded up the animals. One man knelt over a fallen rancher, rifling through his pockets. Eliza Mae's throat tightened. Her hands shook as she raised the rifle. The men looked bigger than she'd imagined, their faces hard and cruel, guns flashing in the morning light. Kiyan dismounted without a word, his movements smooth as water. He touched her arm briefly before slipping into the brush, disappearing. Into shadow like a ghost. Eliza Mae swallowed hard. Her palms were slick with sweat. The rifle felt too heavy, her breath too fast. She wanted to turn back to let Kiyan handle it. But then she heard the rancher's wife cry out, a sound sharp with terror, and something inside her snapped. She steadied her aim, forcing her breath slow the way her father had once taught her. The world narrowed to the sight of one man on horseback. Grinning as he cracked his whip, her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle's roar shattered the morning. The man jerked sideways, tumbling from his horse into the dust. The outlaws froze, shock rippling through their ranks. Then chaos erupted. Horses rearing, men shouting, gunfire cracking. From the brush, Kiyan struck, swift and silent, his blade flashing, his body moving like the storm itself. Eliza Mae reloaded with trembling hands, her heart pounding louder than the gunfire. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. From the laughter, from the whispers, from the scorn. For the first time, she was fighting, and the fear in the thieves' eyes told her they saw it too. The night fell heavy, and with it came the blood moon so red it seemed the heavens themselves had been split open. The land glowed with its eerie light, casting long shadows across the broken prairie. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries. Riding the wind like a warning, Eliza Mae stood at the edge of the burned corral, her rifle across her lap, her dress streaked with dirt and gunpowder. She felt every muscle ache, every bruise burn, yet her heart pulsed with a strange fire. She had shot a man. She had stood with Kiyan, and though fear still gnawed at her, something inside her had awakened. Kiyan sat near her, sharpening his blade with slow, steady movements. The firelight caught the angles of his body, his broad shoulders carved in bronze, tribal jewelry glinting against his skin. His long black hair spilled down his back, catching sparks of moonlight. He was silent, but his eyes never stopped scanning. "The horizon. They'll come back," Eliza Mae whispered, her voice low, as though afraid the shadows themselves might overhear. "Yes," Kiyan said simply. "Thieves do not accept shame. They will bring more." Her stomach tightened. The image of those hard, laughing men still haunted her. But so did the look on the rancher's wife when she realized she had been saved, the gratitude in her tear-streaked face. That memory made Eliza Mae lift her chin. "What will we do when they come?" she asked. Kiyan lifted his head, gazing at the crimson moon. "We will meet them, here, under the eyes of the Great Spirit." The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint thundering of hooves. Eliza Mae froze. It was distant yet undeniable. More riders, just as he had said. Kiyan rose, strapping his knife to his belt. He placed a hand on Eliza Mae's shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding, yet filled with gravity. "You do not run, not tonight. If you run, the fire dies, and you are fire." Her throat tightened, the words searing into her heart. All her life she had been called plain, unwanted, ugly. Yet here, in this man's eyes, she was something unbreakable. The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust curled against the horizon, riders silhouetted in the blood moon's glow. They came fast, a dozen at least, their shouts tearing the silence. Guns flashed in the distance, and sparks crackled as they fired into the air, trying to break the spirit of anyone who might resist. Eliza Mae's fingers tightened on the rifle. Her palms were slick, but her resolve was iron. She was tired of hiding, tired of being the shadow in every room. Kiyan stepped into the moonlight, shirtless, every muscle taut with power. His long hair whipped in the wind, and his silver pendants gleamed like stars fallen to earth. He looked less like a man and more like something called forth from legend, a warrior shaped by fire and blood. When the riders saw him, they faltered. One of them cursed, another laughed nervously. "That's him," one shouted. "The savage with the woman. Kill them both." Gunfire erupted. The night exploded in chaos. Kiyan moved like lightning, darting into the shadows, his blade flashing. As he pulled a rider from his horse, the man's scream tore through the night before silence swallowed it whole. Eliza Mae ducked behind a splintered fence post, her rifle braced against her shoulder. She took aim, breath steady despite the roar in her chest, and fired. A rider tumbled, his horse bolting into the dark. The outlaws pressed harder, circling like wolves. Sparks from gunfire lit the night, glowing against the blood-red sky. The smell of smoke and iron filled the air. Kiyan fought among them like a storm unleashed. He leapt, struck, vanished into the tall grass only to reappear behind another rider. His body gleamed with sweat and moonlight, his long hair a whip of black fire. Every move was sharp, brutal, yet graceful as a dance. Eliza Mae fired again and again, each shot echoing with a lifetime of swallowed shame. Her scar caught the glow of the moon, no longer something to hide but a mark of survival, a mark that made her dangerous. When one rider broke through and lunged at her, she swung the butt of her rifle, cracking it across his face. He fell back, with a howl clutching his jaw. Her breath came ragged, but she did not back down. At last, the field grew quiet. The surviving thieves, bloodied and broken, fled into the night, their curses carried on the wind. The earth was littered with bodies, and the smell of fear. Kiyan stood among them, chest heaving, blade dripping. He turned toward Eliza Mae, his eyes dark but steady. "You did not run," he said, voice rough as stone. Eliza Mae wiped the sweat and dust from her brow, her rifle heavy in her hands. She looked at the blood moon still hanging over them, then back at him. "No, I didn't." For the first time, she saw pride in his gaze, not pity, not tolerance, but pride. And in that moment, with the dead scattered around them and the fire of the moon above, she knew she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Eliza Mae was no longer the woman the town mocked. She was something else entirely. The blood moon sank slowly, its crimson glow fading into the pale wash of dawn. Smoke curled in the distance, and the prairie lay still, as though even the earth itself had paused to catch its breath after the violence of the night. Eliza Mae sat on the broken fence post, the worn rifle still in her lap. Her hands were blistered, her arms heavy, yet she held it as if letting go would break the spell that had carried her through. The scar on her cheek stung with sweat and dust, but she no longer thought of it as shame. It was proof she had not flinched, proof she had endured. Kiyan stood in the field, his chest rising and falling, his long black hair tangled with sweat and dust. The silver pendants around his neck caught the morning light, glinting faintly against his bronze skin. He looked like something carved from stone, a figure who had stepped out of legend and into her life. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full, swollen with the weight of what had passed between them. Finally, Eliza Mae found her voice. It was hoarse, almost fragile. We stopped them." Kiyan turned his head toward her, his gaze steady. "You stopped them." Her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to say she had only followed his lead. But deep down, she knew the truth. When the moment had come, she had not run. She had not hidden. She had stood. "They'll tell stories about this," she whispered, staring at the blood-streaked horizon. "They will tell stories of the warrior who would not bow," Kiyan said, stepping closer. His voice was low, like gravel softened by the wind. "But I will tell of the woman with the fire in her heart." Eliza Mae swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken of her that way, not her father, not the townsfolk, not even herself. She blinked against the sting of tears and looked up at him. He knelt before her, resting one hand gently over hers where it gripped the rifle. His touch was firm but careful, as if he knew how easily she might break after the weight of the night. "You carry more strength than you know," he said. "And now the world has seen it." Her lips trembled into a bitter smile. "The world doesn't see me, Kiyan. It never has." "Not until you?" His dark eyes softened. "They will see now. And if they do not, it does not matter. You are not theirs. You are your own." The words sank into her, deep and steady, like roots finding soil. For the first time in her life, she felt unshackled, not from the scar, not from the whispers, but from the cage she had built in her own heart. The prairie wind shifted, carrying faint sounds from the east, the voices of the townsfolk. They had come at last, drawn by the gunfire and the smoke. Figures appeared on the horizon, hesitant, moving like ghosts. Eliza Mae stiffened. The old fear returned, curling at the edges of her mind. She imagined their stares, their cruel laughter, their cutting words. But Kiyan's hand was still over hers. His presence was solid, immovable. She stood as the townspeople drew closer, the rifle still in her grip, her scar visible in the morning light. The people of Dustwater stopped short when they saw the field littered with bodies, the blood dried black in the dirt. They looked at Kiyan, shirtless and unyielding, his blade at his side, and then they looked at her. For once, no one laughed. No one whispered. Their faces carried something different now: shock, awe, perhaps even shame. One of the ranchers stepped forward, hat in his hands. His voice shook. "You saved us." Eliza Mae felt the words land heavy in her chest. Saved us. Not mocked, not dismissed, saved. She glanced at Kiyan. He gave the smallest nod. Eliza Mae lifted her chin, meeting the eyes of the town that had called her ugly, unwanted, nothing. "We stood against them," she said simply. Her voice carried, steady, unbroken. The townsfolk murmured, uncertain, humbled. For the first time, they saw her not as the scarred woman who had been cast aside, but as something entirely new. The sun crested the horizon, burning away the last of the blood moon. Eliza Mae turned back to Kiyan, and in his gaze she found not pity, not duty, but recognition. That night had changed everything for the town, for Kiyan, for her. And though she did not know what roads lay ahead, she knew one thing with a certainty that filled her bones: she was no longer the woman they whispered about. She was the fire that would not go out.